You left our sons in the hand of a maid, a mere stranger where you were having fun with your friends, and now he's gone. What were you thinking?" Idara could barely speak as guilt flooded her. "I didn't mean for this to happen. Edet wasn't listening. His mind was racing with fear and panic. Idara was the definition of elegance and sophistication. Married to Edet, a prominent business executive, she lived a life that many in Uyo, Akwa Ibom envied. Idara was used to having everything she wanted: a perfect marriage, the best clothes, the best friends, and the freedom to do whatever she liked. Life had always been glamorous from the very beginning, and she wasn't about to let anything change that, not even motherhood. 2 years into their marriage, Idara gave birth to their son, Samuel. Edet was overjoyed and wanted them to have more children, hoping for a bigger family. "Samuel is perfect, but wouldn't it be nice to give him a sibling?" Edet suggested one evening as they sat together after dinner. But Idara, gazing at herself in the mirror, wasn't keen on the idea. "Samuel is enough," she replied, her voice firm. "I don't want to go through the pregnancy stress again. I don't want to lose my body and my looks." Edet was disappointed but didn't push her. He loved his wife dearly, and he thought perhaps with time she would change her mind. For now, he focused on enjoying life with his little family. Soon after Samuel's birth, Edet received an exciting promotion at his company. The job came with a substantial pay raise and also required him to travel frequently. He had to be away for most of the week, leaving Idara and Samuel at home. Before his first long trip, Edet sat Idara down. "Idara, I'll be traveling more often now, but I trust you to take care of the house and Samuel while I'm away. You don't need to work, just focus on our home and our son." Idara nodded, but felt a growing sense of boredom at the idea of being homebound. She had enjoyed the luxury of her lifestyle, and while Samuel was her child, she didn't want to sacrifice her independence and freedom for motherhood. Her friends were still living the life she used to: parties, outings, and social events. As soon as Edet left for his business trips, the reality of her new life settled in. Taking care of Samuel was a full-time job, and Idara wasn't accustomed to doing everything herself. She loved her son, but the constant demands of motherhood felt suffocating. She missed her old life, the parties, the glamorous night out with friends, and the attention and the freedom she gained. One day, she received a message from her close friend, inviting her to an exclusive party in town. As she looked down at the invitation, the temptation was too strong to resist. She longed to feel herself again, but she knew she couldn't go out carrying a child. She found herself torn. She couldn't imagine being stuck in the house for the rest of her life, but she also didn't want to disappoint Edet, her beloved husband. The weekend Edet left for his work trip, Idara found herself alone with her son. The responsibilities of the house was looming over her. The sound of her friends' voices echoed in her mind. They were all talking about the grand party they were planning, a glamorous event filled with laughter, music, and the excitement Idara used to thrive on. The thought of being stuck at home while they celebrated gnawed at her. That Friday night, as she sat on the couch, tired from the day of taking care of Samuel, she stared at the invitation on her phone screen. The urge to attend the party grew stronger by the minute. She missed the feeling of dressing up, missed the attention, and missed the way her old life made her feel alive. "I can't stay stuck like this," she muttered to herself after a long pause. Idara picked up her phone and dialed a number she had saved from her agency. The woman on the other end assured her that someone reliable who could help with childcare was available. The next morning, a young woman named Alero arrived at Idara's door. She was quiet but seemed efficient, her eyes scanning the house as Idara introduced her to Samuel and explained what she needed. "I need you to take care of the whole house and Samuel," Idara said, trying not to sound too desperate. "I have an important outing and I'll be back late." Alera nodded, accepting the task without any question. She seemed reliable, and for the first time in a long time, Idara felt a rush of freedom. She went to her room and pulled out one of her most elegant dresses, the one she hadn't worn in ages. As she stood in front of the mirror, she admired herself, It felt good to be back in her element, to feel like the woman she had been before Samuel came along. That evening, Idara left the house with a mix of excitement and guilt. The thought of not telling Edith weighed on her, but she brushed it aside. "You wouldn't know," she whispered to herself. "It's just one night." The party was everything she had hoped for. Music, laughter, familiar faces. Her friends greeted her with enthusiasm, and for the very first few hours, Adara forgot about the stress of her home life. She danced, drank champagne, and soaked in the compliments of her friend. "You still look amazing, Idara," one of them remarked, admiring her dress. Idara smiled, enjoying the moment. But deep down, she knew that this world wasn't where she truly belonged anymore. As the night wore on, she began to feel a sense of unease. Back at home, Alera had put Samuel to bed and was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone. When Idara finally returned home in the early hours of the morning, the house was dark. She found Alera dozing off on the living room couch and Samuel crying in his crib. Guilt washed over her as she hurried to soothe him, realizing how she had left her responsibilities behind for a night of fun. She felt conflicted. Part of her was glad she had gone out, but another part of her regretted the decision. The following week, when Edith returned from his business trip, Idara greeted him with a nervous smile. She knew she had to tell him about hiring Alero, but she wasn't sure of how he would react. "Edith, I have something to tell you," she started, trying to keep her voice steady. He raised an eyebrow, already sensing that something was off. "What is it?" "I have been feeling overwhelmed with taking care of Samuel and managing the house," Idara said, her words coming out in a rush. "So I hired a maid, Alero, to help me out. She's been looking after Samuel while you were away." Edith's expression shifted from confusion to anger. "You hired a maid without talking to me first?" Idara lowered her eyes, ashamed. "I'm sorry, Edith. I didn't want to worry you while you were gone. It's just been so much for me." Edith's jaw tightened. "I trusted you to handle things here, Idara. This isn't what I expected when I asked you to stay home with Samuel." "I know," she replied quickly. "I didn't mean to keep it from you. I needed some help, and I thought this was the best way." Edith took a deep breath, trying to contain his frustration. He loved Idara, but this was not the first time she had gone against his wishes. "You should have told me. You are Samuel's mother, and I expect you to be the one taking care of him, not some stranger." Idara felt the weight of his disappointment, but she also felt a sense of relief that he wasn't angrier. "I will still take care of things," she promised. "I'll be more involved. Alero is just here to help when things get overwhelming." After a long pause, Edith finally nodded. "Fine, but make sure you're still taking care of Samuel yourself. He needs his mother, not just some maid." Idara nodded, thankful that Edith hadn't completely lost his temper, but as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of their troubles. At first, Idara tried to keep up appearances, acting like she was more involved in her household duties. She would spend a few minutes with Samuel, making sure he was dressed, and then leave the rest to Alero. However, it wasn't long before she fully handed over her responsibilities to the maid. Alera became the one who took care of everything, feeding Samuel, bathing him, cleaning the house, cooking meals, and even managing the laundry. All these things that Idara should have been doing were now Alera's tasks. Meanwhile, Idara was back to living her old life, attending glamorous parties, going on shopping sprees, and spending hours at luxurious spas. She relished the attention from her friends, who admired her seemingly perfect life. To them, she had it all: a beautiful home, a loving husband, and a carefree lifestyle, but behind the scenes, things were far from perfect. Whenever Edith returned from one of his business trips, he noticed the changes immediately. The house was always spotless, thanks to Alero, but the distance between Idara and their son was glaring. Samuel had grown attached to Alero, and it was clear to Edith that his wife was barely spending time with their child. One evening, after returning from a week-long trip, Edith walked into the house and found Samuel playing in the living room with Alera watching over him. Idara, however, was nowhere to be found. Frustrated, Edith called out to Elero, "Where is Madame?" "She went out, sir," Elero replied politely. She didn't say when she would be back. Edith felt a familiar wave of frustration wash over him. When Idara finally returned home later that evening, dressed in a designer outfit and holding multiple shopping bags, Edith couldn't hold back any longer. "Idara, this is not what we agreed on," he snapped. "Alero is supposed to help out and not take over everything. You are Samuel's mother. You need to be present in his life." Idara rolled her eyes, brushing off his concerns. "Edith, I am present. It's just been a busy time for me lately, with all the events and things going on. I'll do better, I promise you." Days turned into weeks and nothing changed. Every time Edith brought up the issue, Idara had new excuse ready. "I had a charity event to attend," or she would say, "My friends needed me," or "I am just exhausted from everything." She always found a way to justify her absence. As time passed, Edith grew more and more frustrated. He loved Idara, but he couldn't ignore how distant she had become, not just from him, but from their son as well. Every time he returned from trips, it seemed like Samuel had grown more attached to Alero, as if she were the one raising him. One night, Edith tried once again to have a serious conversation with Idara. "Idara, you're missing out on your son's life," Edith said, his voice filled with concern. "He is growing up so fast, and you're not there for him. You are too busy with everything else." Idara sighed, clearly annoyed by the conversation. "Why do you keep bringing this up? I am doing the best I can. Alero is there to help and she's doing a great job already." "Alero is doing your job, Idara. Your job." Edith's voice rose slightly. "You are his mother. He needs you, not just a maid." "I am still here, aren't I?" Idara snapped back, her patience wearing thin. "I'm providing for him. I make sure everything is taken care of. What more do you want from me?" "I want you to be his mother," Edith replied. "I want you to spend time with Samuel, to bond with him. He barely even looks for you anymore. All he knows is Alero." Idara crossed her arms, clearly not interested in hearing any more of the conversations. "I'll try harder, okay? But stop making it seem like I'm neglecting him. I am doing what I can." As the months passed, Idara became even more distant from her responsibility as a mother and a wife. Alero had taken complete control of the household, from caring for Samuel to managing all the domestic chores. Idara was barely home anymore, constantly attending social events and parties. She had returned to her luxurious lifestyle with full force, while her family's needs were neglected. Meanwhile, Edith was becoming increasingly frustrated. Whenever he returned from his trip, the house was empty, not because it was unclean or disorganized, but because the warmth and care that should have come from Idara was missing. Samuel barely spent any time with his mother, and the few moments they did share were superficial. Then came the call that pushed Edith to his limits. One day, while he was away on another trip, he received a phone call from one of their neighbors. The neighbor had seen a large group of people entering and leaving their home over the weekend and wanted to make sure everything was okay. "Edith, I didn't want to meddle, but I thought you should know," the neighbor said over the phone. "Idara has been hosting these big parties. It's been going on for a while now. I just thought you should be aware." Edith was stunned. He had trusted Idara to take care of the house and their son, but instead, she was turning their home into a party venue. Furious, he cut his business trip short and returned home immediately. When Edith walked into the house, he found it quiet. Alera was in the living room with Samuel, who was playing with his toys. Idara, however, was nowhere to be found again. Edith's heart sank as he realized the truth. His wife was completely checked out of her role as a mother and her wife. As weeks passed, the tension between Edith and Idara only grew. Every time Edith returned from his trips, he was met with the same scene: Alero managing the household and Samuel growing more attached to the maid, and Idara completely nowhere to be found. For a while, it seemed like things had settled down. Idara had promised to be more responsible, and Edith tried to focus on his work, hoping that his wife would finally keep to her words. Though he wanted to believe her, the reality of the situation weighed heavily on him. The cracks in their marriage were becoming more apparent with each passing day, but Edith wasn't sure how to repair them. Idara did make some efforts to appear more involved at first. She would occasionally stay at home for a few days, spending more time with Samuel and even cooking meals for the family, but it was clear that her heart wasn't in it. The lavish lifestyle and her desire to socialize still held a stronger grip on her. Alera continued to take on most of the responsibilities. She was more of a mother to Samuel than Idara, and Edith couldn't help but feel increasingly disconnected from his wife. Later that night, as Edith lay in bed waiting for Idara to return, his thoughts spiraled. He couldn't understand why his wife had become so distant. What had happened to the woman he had married, the woman who had once seemed so caring and committed to their family? Hours passed, and when Idara finally walked through the door, Edith was already wide awake. She acted as if nothing was wrong, slipping off her heels and heading straight to the bathroom. "Where were you?" Edith asked, his voice calm but laced with disappointment. Idara, who clearly wasn't in the mood for a confrontation, sighed. "I told you, Edith, I was out with my friends. What's the big deal?" "The big deal is that you promised me you would be more involved," Edith replied, his frustration boiling to the surface. "I come home from a long trip and you're not here. Samuel barely sees you anymore. How is this being a mother?" Idara rolled her eyes. "I'm doing just the best that I can, Edith. I need my space too. I am a mother doesn't mean I will not have time to enjoy. Just because I'm a mother doesn't mean I should stop living my life." "You've left everything to Alera," Edith said, sitting up in bed. "She's the one raising your child and not you. You can't just keep passing off your responsibilities to her. I married you, not her." "Are we really going to do this right now?" Idara asked, her tone dismissive. "I am tired, Edith. I don't need a lecture, not one from you." "You're tired?" Edith repeated, disbelief flashing across his face. "I am the one who is tired, Idara. Tired of coming home to a wife who is not there. Tired of pretending like everything is okay when it's not." Idara didn't respond. She simply turned away, ignoring the tension that filled the room. Edith lay back, staring at the ceiling, feeling a growing sense of hopelessness. Everything came crashing down one fateful day. Edith returned from yet another business trip, but this time, the house was eerily quiet. There were no sounds of Samuel playing, no smell of food cooking in the kitchen, and no signs of Alera either. At first, Edith thought maybe Idara had taken Samuel out for a walk or a quick errand, but as he moved through the house, something felt terribly wrong. There was an uncertain stillness in the air, and when he glanced around, he noticed several items were missing. Some valuables like expensive jewelries, phones, laptop, and even the family's prized artwork had vanished. His heart pounded in his chest. "Alera," he called out, his voice echoing through the empty house. There was no response. He rushed to Samuel's room, praying his son would be there, but the room was empty. Panic began to rise in his throat. "Idara! Idara! Alera! Samuel!" Edith's voice grew frantic as he raced through every room in the house, opening doors, looking under beds, behind furniture, anywhere his son could possibly be, but Samuel was nowhere to be found. His hands shaking, Edith grabbed his phone and dialed Idara's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice carefree and oblivious to the chaos unfolding at home. "Where are you?" Edith demanded, barely able to control the tremble in his voice. "I am at a friend's place," Idara replied. "What is the matter?" "Come home now," Edith backed, his patience snapping. "Samuel is missing, and so is Alera." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What do you mean, Samuel? What do you mean Samuel is missing? Alera was supposed to be watching him." "I said come home, Idara," Edith roared before hanging up. Within minutes, Idara rushed through the front door, her heart pounding with fear. She found Edith pacing the living room, his face pale with anger and panic. "What happened?" she asked breathlessly, her voice trembling as she looked around at the disarray. "I don't know," Edith snapped, barely able to keep his composure. "But Samuel is gone, and so is Alera. The house is a mess, and all our valuables are missing. You were supposed to be here. You were supposed to take care of him, Idara." Tears welled up in Idara's eyes as she absorbed the weight of his words. Edith, I didn't know this would happen. I thought, Alero, you thought? Edith cut her off, his voice cold and angry. You left our sons in the hand of a maid, a mere stranger where you were having fun with your friends, and now he's gone. What were you thinking? Idara could barely speak as guilt flooded her. I didn't mean for this to happen. Edith wasn't listening. His mind was racing with fear and panic. The panic that gripped the both of them was overwhelming, and as the hours counted, their hope dwindled and desperation took over. They called Alero's phone repeatedly, but each time it was switched off. The unsettling silence from the other end of the line was like a slap to their already frayed nerves. Fear gnawed at them with every passing second. The couple contacted the police immediately, providing them with every detail they could remember about Alero, her appearance, the little they knew about her, and the fact that she was with their son, Samuel. The police assured them that they would do everything in their power to find the child, but Edith wasn't content with just waiting around. He and Idara began a desperate search of their own. They scoured the entire city, driving through every street, alley, and neighborhood they could think of. They checked parks, bus stations, markets, anywhere Alero might have taken Samuel. They asked strangers, held up pictures of their son, and described the maid who had disappeared with him, but no one had seen them. Hours turned into days, and still there was no news. Each day felt like an eternity. Edith, consumed by grief, began to withdraw. The frustration and anger he felt towards Idara only grew, festering like a wound that wouldn't heal. He barely spoke to her, and when he did, his words were sharp and filled with bitterness. One night, after returning from another fruitless search, Edith finally snapped. You've ruined our family, Idara. You are a failed mother, he shouted, his voice hoarse with anger and exhaustion. This is all your fault. You left our son with a complete stranger so you could run off and have fun with your friends. If anything happens to Samuel, I will never forgive you. Idara stood frozen, her face pale, her heart shattered. She had no words to defend herself because deep down she knew he was right. She had been reckless. She had put her own desires above her responsibilities as a mother, and now her son was gone. Tears streamed down her face as she choked out, I am sorry, Edith. I am so sorry. I never thought. I didn't know. But her apologies felt hollow. Edith's pain ran too deep, and no amount of words could undo what had happened. He turned away from her, unable to even look at her. We are supposed to be parents, Idara, Edith said quietly, his voice thick with emotions. How could you have been so careless? Our son, our baby boy, is out there somewhere, and we don't even know if he's even safe. Idara collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. The guilt and the regret she felt were suffocating. Every day that Samuel remained missing was a reminder of her failure. She had tried reaching out to her friends for support, but none of them could offer any comfort. They all knew what had happened, and they pitied her, but they couldn't help. Meanwhile, the police continued their investigation, but progress was slow. They had checked the fake agency Alero had come from, but it was as if the entire operation had vanished into thin air. No leads, no traces. It was as if Alero had been planning this all along, and she had covered her tracks very well. Edith became obsessed with the search. He barely slept, barely ate, and spent every waking moment either driving around the city or glued to his phone, waiting for any kind of updates from the authorities. He contacted private investigators, offering them large sums of money to track down Alero and Samuel, but even they struggled to find any leads. Idara, on the other hand, was drowning in her own sorrow. She spent hours sitting in Samuel's empty room, staring at his crib, clutching his little clothes, and praying for his safe return. She barely had the strength to get out of bed most days, and when she did, the weight of her guilt was unbearable. One night, after another heated argument, Edith left the house, slamming the door behind him. He drove aimlessly through the city, his mind racing with thoughts of his son. He couldn't shake the image of Samuel crying out for him, needing him, and being helpless to save him. He parked the car and sat at the dark, his hands gripping the steering wheel as tears rolled down his face. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself break down completely. The weight of it all, the fear, the anger, the guilt was too much to bear. Meanwhile, back at home, Idara lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling. She had never felt so alone in her entire life. She had pushed her husband away, failed her own child, and destroyed their family. All she could do now was hope. Hope that somehow, against all odds, Samuel would be found. One afternoon, as they sat in silence, their phones rang almost simultaneously. Edith picked up the call. It was the police. "We've got something," the officer said, his tone more urgent than before. "We've received a tip-off. Alera was seen near a border town, trying to flee the country with Samuel." The words echoed in Edith's ears. Alera had been spotted. After weeks of searching with no leads, they finally had a glimmer of hope. Without wasting a second, Edith grabbed his keys. He and Idara raced to the police station, barely exchanging words, but knowing that they were united in one goal, which was bringing back their son. As they were going, Edith received another call, telling them that Alero and Samuel had been found and had been taken to the nearest police station. As they drove, the silence between them was deafening. Idara stared at the window, tears streaming down her face as she silently prayed. Edith's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his knuckles white from the pressure, his heart pounded in his chest. When they arrived at the police station, they were led inside by an officer. The moment they walked through the door, Edith's eyes locked on Samuel, who was placed quietly at the corner of the room. He looked smaller than Edith remembered, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear, but he was safe. "Samuel," Edith called out, his voice cracking with emotion. Samuel's head snapped up, and the moment he saw his father, he leaped and ran into his arms. Edith scooped him up, holding him tightly as tears streamed down his face. "My boy," Edith whispered, kissing Samuel's forehead. "You are safe now. Daddy is here." Idara stood a few feet away, frozen in shock. She couldn't believe her eyes. Her son was right there in front of her. She wanted to run to him, to hold him, to tell him how sorry she was, but her feet refused to move. Samuel looked over Edith's shoulders and saw his mother. "Mama," he whispered softly. At that moment, Idara broke free from her paralysis and ran towards him, enveloping him in her arms. "Samuel, I am so sorry," she cried, holding him tightly. "I will never let you out of my sight again." For a few minutes, the family stood there, embracing, their tears of relief mingling with the pain and trauma of the last few weeks. But Samuel was safe. That was all that mattered. Meanwhile, Alero sat in another room, handcuffed and awaiting interrogation. When the police brought her in, her face was devoid of any remorse. Edith's anger fled when he saw her, but the officers held him back. "She is part of a child trafficking ring," one of the officers explained to Edith and Idara. "They sell children to couples who can't have their own or use them for other purposes like sex work or domestic labor." She had no intention of keeping Samuel safe. The thought of what could have happened to their son made Edith's stomach turn. He clenched his fists, fighting back the rage that threatened to consume him. Alero, during her interrogation, reviewed everything. She had been working with a fake maid agency that supplied women like her to wealthy families. They would gain the trust of the family, abduct the children, and then sell them to the highest bidder. Samuel had been next on their list, but they had been caught before they could complete the transaction. As Alero's confession unfolded, Edith and Idara couldn't believe what they were hearing. They had trusted her with their home, their son, and she had almost taken everything from them. The police assured Edith and Idara that Alero and the others involved in the trafficking ring would face justice. They had tracked down several members of the ring and were closing in on the entire operation. Edith, still holding Samuel close, nodded. "I just want my son to be safe. That's all I care about right now." Back at home, Edith sat in the living room, holding Samuel close. The joy of having his son back was undeniable, but beneath it all, his heart was heavy. His marriage to Idara had been crumbling for months, and the recent event had destroyed the last remnants of trust he had in her. The following day, after putting Samuel to bed, Edet confronted Idara. He looked at her directly in the eyes, his face a mark of both anger and sadness. "This has gone too far, Idara. I can't keep doing this," he began. Idara, sensing the weight of his voice, looked at him, her own eyes filled with regret. "Edet, I know I have made mistakes, terrible ones, but I love you and Samuel. Please give me another chance. I will change, I promise," she pleaded, her voice trembling with desperation. Edet shook his head. "You don't understand, do you? You put our son in danger. You left him in the hands of someone we barely knew so you could enjoy your life. Samuel could have been taken away from us forever. How can I ever trust you again?" Tears streamed down Idara's face. "I was selfish, I know, but I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I am so sorry, Edet. I can change. I'll be a better mother. I'll be more responsible. Just don't leave me," she begged, clutching his hands. But Edet gently pulled his hand away. "It's too late, Idara. You've already shown me who you are, and I can't live like this anymore. I need to focus on my son. Now he's all that matters." He stood up and handed her some documents. Inside were the divorce papers. "It's over," Edet said, his voice steady despite the sadness in his eyes. "I want a divorce." Idara stared at the papers in disbelief. "No, Edet, please, not like this." She tried to grab his hands again, but Edet stepped back, his face resolute. "I have already spoken to the lawyer," Edet continued. "I'll be filing for full custody of Samuel. You will be allowed visitation, but that's it. You've lost my trust, and I can't be in a marriage where I'm constantly worried about my son's safety." The words hit Idara like a blow. Her heart sank, and for the first time, she realized that her actions had not only endangered her child, but had also cost her everything: her family, her marriage, her life with Edet. "But where will I go? What about Samuel? I love him, Edet. I am his mother," she cried. "You will still be able to see him," Edet replied, his voice firm. "But I am doing this for him. He deserves better than what we've been giving him." Idara slumped into the chair, her world crashing down around her. Edet's mind was made up, and no amount of pleading or apologies could change it. She knew she had failed her family in the worst possible way. And a few months later, the court granted Edet full custody of Samuel. Idara was devastated. She was given limited visitation rights, just a few hours each week to see her son. It wasn't enough, but it was all she had now. She knew she couldn't blame anyone else but herself. Edet adjusted to life as a single father, and although it was difficult at times, he cherished every moment he spent with Samuel. He took on a remote job so he could be present in his son's life, ensuring that Samuel was surrounded by love and stability. Idara's once glamorous life was now a distant memory. The parties, the social gatherings, the superficial friendships, they meant nothing without her family. She had lost everything, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't undo the damage she had caused. Edet, on the other hand, found peace in his new life. He focused on being the best father he could be, determined to give Samuel the love and attention he needed. Although the pain of his broken marriage still lingered, Edet knew he had made the right decision for his son's future. Even though the memory of what had happened still lingered, Edet was determined to give Samuel a happy and secure childhood. He made sure to attend every school event, and in the evenings they would play games, read stories, or simply talk about their day. Slowly, the fear and confusion in Samuel's eyes began to fade, replaced with trust and love that only a father's care could provide. For Edet, it was a second chance at fatherhood. He wasn't going to let anything stand in the way of his son's happiness. Idara, on the other hand, struggled to cope with the consequences of her actions. She had moved into a small apartment, far from the luxurious life she once knew. Her friends no longer called, and the invitations to the glamorous party she once lived for had dried up. She spent many nights staring at old family photos, tears slipping down her face as she regretted the choices that had led her here. Idara missed Samuel more than words could express, but the limited visitation right granted by the court meant she could only see him for a few hours. Every visit was bittersweet for her. Meanwhile, the legal process continued for Alero and the members of the trafficking ring. They were each sentenced to long prison terms, and the media coverage of the case brought some closure to other families affected by their crimes. The courtroom had been tense, with the traffickers showing no remorse, but the weight of justice finally brought some peace to those who had suffered. For Edith and Samuel, life had settled into a peaceful rhythm. They learned to heal, finding joy in simple moments they shared. Edith taught Samuel how to ride a bike, helped him with his homework, and celebrated his small victories, whether it was a good grade or a new friend at school. Their bond grew stronger every day, and Edith found himself becoming not just a father, but also Samuel's best friend and protector. In the end, life moved forward for all of them. Edith and Samuel found peace in each other's company, while Idara walked towards a future where she could be a part of her son's life as much as she could. The pain and scars would never fully disappear, but they had all learned the valuable lessons about love, responsibility, and the consequences of their choices. The story teaches that true wealth lies in love, trust, and responsibility within a family. Neglecting these important values for personal desires can lead to disastrous consequences. Idara's obsession with her social life caused her to make reckless decisions that endangered her child and ultimately led to the breakdown of her marriage. The story also emphasizes the importance of being present for one's family, as Edith's decision to change his lifestyle helped restore peace and security for his son. Mistakes once made can leave lasting scars, and while forgiveness may be sought, some consequences are irreversible. Thank you so much for watching this fantastic story on African Stories by Tiana. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more amazing stories. See you next time.